It sounds a little... We're a railroad town. What can I say? I think we'll go ahead and start. So a few minutes after 6, let's go ahead and start this evening. I want to welcome everyone, members and guests, to our first lecture of the 2026 lecture series of the Innis Heritage Society. We're glad you're all here for this interesting lecture with a special guest from out of town. So that's pretty wonderful. I guess to start off, as a tradition with our organization, let's start off with an invocation. So if you all don't mind bowing your heads, please. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and for this opportunity to be together to learn about our history and the majesty of your creation. We ask that all present reach their homes safely this evening after our program. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much. Before I turn over this talk to Emily for introductions, I have a couple things I want to mention. As you came in, there is a sign-in list for guests and members at the door. At our wonderful card table that is probably from the 40s, that has all these ads from various Innis businesses in the 40s around town. So that's kind of one of our historic artifacts that we have. And we also, if you're a member, and you don't already have your yearbook, we have yearbooks there for you. If you're not a member, we can take your money and give you a fresh yearbook. $20 for individual, $30 for family. And that is from now through the end of our year, which would be September. Let's see. The other thing to mention is we have some artifacts over here at the side table, and also a few bottles of water and some, how would I put this, historic candy? Appropriate to the 30s candy, 20s and 30s candy in the bowl over there. So we have some artifacts, and also the library was kind enough to identify some books in the collection that relate to the Dust Bowl, and so those are available to be checked out if you want to know a little more in depth about tonight's subject. And then I also, of course, want to thank the library for allowing us to use this wonderful community room for our lecture series. It's really a wonderful asset that we have here in Innis, and I'm so glad that it's made available to us on Thursday evenings when they're open late anyway. So that makes it all the more handy. Without anything else to say that I can think of, I'll turn over the podium to Emily McKay, who is a board member of the Heritage Society, and she is the person who has found our guest speaker for tonight. And so I've asked her to do our introduction. So, Emily, please. Oh, it's fine. You can hide behind this.
Hey everybody, glad y'all are here. I can't take full credit for this. Marianne helps quite a bit as well, but Dan is our true hero here because he's so graciously volunteered to speak. Dan is no stranger to Texas. He's a 6th generation Texan. He taught for 38 years, first at an Episcopal school in Dallas and then at St. Mark's for 37 years after that. He taught 7th and 12th graders earth and environmental science. And tonight he's going to be talking to us about the Dust Bowl and its ecological and historical observations that go along with Texas. So without further ado, sir, it's up to you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you. All righty. All right. Well, howdy. I'm gonna move this just a little bit because I tend to gesticulate a lot, and the next thing you know, stuff's gonna be everywhere. So you know. So as she said, I taught a long time. I taught 7th graders a long time, 12th graders. Well, I attempted to teach 12th graders for a long time. So you guys, if you come up with a question during it, you know, shoot up a hand, just have at it. You're not gonna, you know, make me falter any more than I would normally anyway. So if you got questions during, go ahead and ask if you want. We can have questions at the end too. This talk is about the ecological history of the Dust Bowl, but of course a lot of it has to do with right here in Texas too. So the historical part, the cultural part comes in as well. The early part, that's the more technical ecological stuff, I'll probably zip through a little faster. And if you want to ask questions about that part, we can do that at the end or during the middle, whatever you want. But anyway, we'll just dive in and see what happens, all right? But don't be shy, though. If you have a question or if I go too fast or you want to know something more about something, just let me know. Let me know. All right? Okay, all right, let's have at it. Okay, so this will be, I'm going to break it up into 3 sections, historically speaking. The pre-Columbian, so before Columbus, and then up from Columbus to around 1900-ish, okay? And then after 1900-ish, all right? So we'll do 3 sections. Okay, go ahead. All right, so early on, if we go way back, and I'm talking way pre-Columbian, right? Way back 60-ish million years ago when the Rocky Mountains were getting pushed up, okay? That creation of a mountain range made it where there was a lot of sediments coming off of the Rocky Mountains and ending up out on to what we now call the Great Plains, okay? So the origin of a lot of what became the dust in the Dust Bowl is off of the uplifting Rocky Mountains from tens of millions of years ago. All right, so plenty of time for all the sediments that had been on top of what became the Rockies and then the Rockies themselves. Those sediments weathered off of there, eroded down, a lot of them got deposited, a lot of it got taken out into the Gulf of Mexico, but that's where a lot of the sediments came from. Okay, next. All right, so here, so if you can picture the Rocky Mountains, all right, in this part of Colorado and so forth, and then out down into New Mexico. All right, those mountains come up, weathering and erosion happens, material comes off, and it gets laid down all through what became the Great Plains, okay, within the line there. Next. Okay, and so there's another view of it. So the black line is outlining the full extent of what the Great Plains are considered to be. Okay, next. All right. And then let's see. So the other big source of sediments for the Great Plains anyway, was glaciation. So instead of the time scale of millions of years, we're just looking at thousands and tens of thousands of years. So the last glacial period ended, or the last glacial maximum was around 12,000 years ago. Okay. So during that time, during the last glacial maximum, you had big continental glaciers expanding from the north, all right? And then this would have been the edge of some of the continental glaciers that formed during the last ice age, all right? And glaciers, if you go to the next one, glaciers are like super bulldozers, supercharged bulldozers, all right? Tons of weight, tons of scour power, okay? And they will take anything and everything with them as they move across the land. They will completely erode whatever's under them and then use everything that they're eroding to scour whatever the bedrock is for as long as the glaciers last, for as long as they are moving. So lots and lots of material was brought down from the north to the Great Plains, to portions of the Great Plains, as glacial material, which we call moraine material. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with that? Okay, next. So this is just an example of a small glacier, an alpine glacier, and you're looking up the valley. This is the glacier way up here. And what this right here, that glacier is receding, okay, and it's leaving behind humongous amounts of glacial material, of moraine material, right? So that's just a bit of a taste. You can see the bedrock that was underneath the glacier when it was farther down the valley. You can see the bedrock here and the scouring, the stry left by the glaciers, right? Next. Okay. Again, just incredible amounts of material. Next. Okay. So for an example of how much material, so here in this picture, there's a terminal moraine. The terminal moraines are the mounds of materials left at the front of the glacier, once the glacier finally begins to recede, okay? So as it melts and recedes, all the rubble just gets dropped right there at the front of the glacier, right? So anybody guess what the terminal moraine in this picture is? No, they were a fold mountain belt. No. A lot of you are close in a way. It's Long Island. Yeah, Long Island is a terminal moraine from the last ice age. So glaciers had come over. New York City, if you're ever in New York City, right? If you're ever right, if you're ever in New York City and you go to Central Park, there's some areas with the big boulders in Central Park that have the scratches from the glacier, from the last glaciers in the last ice age. So continental glaciers had come over this entire area, and then that's as far as one of the lobes reached before it began receding, melting and receding. All right, and it left this huge terminal moraine, which is now Long Island. All right, just for some scale, if that makes sense, right? So lots of material. So between the Rockies dumping lots of material east, and then the glaciers bringing lots of material down from the north, there was a lot of material all over the Great Plains, composing the Great Plains, which became the basis for all the soil of the Great Plains. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with that? Next. This is just a shot in Iowa of a dirt road that's cut through a lot of the glacial material. A lot of the glacial material can be very, very fine material, not just the rubble and the boulders and so forth, but material that is so fine it's called rock flour, like as in flour you'd bake with. It's so fine, right? So that's called loess. So this material, a lot of the very fine material is loess. If you know geology at all, if you're ever out and you're in volcanic ash columns, ash layers and stuff like that, it's the same texture. It's very, very fine. You can dig into it with your fingernails. It's extremely fine material. Okay, next. Okay, that's just a shot of next to a big, not a big river, but a river. All that material underneath those folks up on the hill is loess. It's all glacial. All right, next. Okay, so that's showing where a lot of the glacial material got dumped during the last ice age. So between all the material coming off of the Rockies and then all the glacial material coming down and dumping, lots and lots of material to make up what became the soils that then we ended up, losing later. That's where it was the origin. Okay, now shifting gears just slightly. So once you have all that material all in the Great Plains area, then what grows on it is going to depend on your average temperature and precipitation. Does that make sense? So in other words, what biome is created there depends on how much rain you're going to get on average and what the temperature is on average, year after year, decade after decade. Okay? So in other words, if you look up at the Great Plains, you don't see a tropical rainforest growing there, right? And you'd know, just thinking about it, you'd know that's because it's not hot enough and it's not wet enough to have a tropical rainforest in Kansas, right? So that's what I'm saying. What grows in the Great Plains depends on what its average temperature and average precipitation is in those different areas of the Great Plains. So what the average temperature and the average precipitation gives us in most of the Great Plains is grasslands, is prairies, right? Not enough precipitation or constant enough precipitation for trees, generally speaking. You get trees in river valleys and stuff like that, okay? And if somebody plants them and so forth. But generally, the trees like to have more consistent rainfall than grasses can handle. And the plains, especially the closer you get to the Rocky Mountains, the plains are not, they just do not have that much rainfall per year. Okay, the plains that are closer to the Rocky Mountains are part of a rain shadow. So up in eastern Colorado, in the panhandle of Texas, you're looking at 20 inches of rainfall a year max, generally speaking, right? So not a lot of rainfall. Trees don't appreciate that little bit of rainfall. You also have big temperature swings from the summers where it can be over 100 to winters where it can even get below 0, depending on how far up in the Great Plains you are. Trees don't necessarily like that sort of difference either, right? But especially not without enough water to deal with it. So this part, if we were in ecology, we'd spend a lot more time on this graph. But we'll head on. Everybody okay with why we've got grasslands in the grasslands, right? Okay, next. Let's see. I'm going to skip that because that's more ecology stuff. Let's see. Stable climate. Let's see. No, we'll skip that part. So that's more eco. Okay. Now, you might have heard sometimes people refer to tall grass prairie, mixed grass, or short grass prairie. That's a rainfall thing mostly. Okay. So as you're closer to the Rockies where it gets drier and drier, then you end up with your shorter grasses. So your short grass prairies are the yellow band, all right? And then the farther you get from the Rockies, the more moisture that you'll get coming up off the Gulf as the year goes on. So by the time you get over into the eastern part of the grasslands, then this is the tall grass prairie over there. So tall grasses as in, 5 to 8 feet tall type grasses, right? So that's why you get the different sizes of grasses. It's a rainfall thing. Next. Okay. So grassland, so all those grasslands, what we call the Great Plains, all right, it would have all been prairie ecosystems, all right, not like when I was a kid growing up and I'd think of grasslands, I'd think of the hayfield, where you look out on and you see the cows on the field and you think, well, that's prairie. I didn't learn till later. It's like, well, that's grass, but it's mostly Bermuda or Bahia, right? And maybe a couple of other things, but that's mostly non-native grasses you're looking at, which the cows are eating. Real prairie has a huge amount of biodiversity, so we'll show the next slide, that includes grasses as well as lots of different wildflowers. It's not a whole lot of native, of primary, untouched type prairie left in the states anymore. Question?
I'm going to ask because here in town we have the Kachina Prairie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so my simple mind thinks, oh, that's native grasses.
Right.
Are they, or is it like reintroduced? Or?
I don't know. Does anybody know the Kachina? I'm not familiar with the Kachina. I wish I'd have looked that up before we got here. More native. I mean, usually if they're going to name it the something or another prairie, usually it's because it's more of a primary native type stuff. But really, if you're getting a lot of forbs, a lot of the wildflowers and stuff in there with it, with the grasses and a variety of grasses, then yeah, it's probably more of the native stuff, definitely. Yeah.
What the Kachina Prairie is it's land near the lake that was never plowed.
Oh, great. Yeah.
The grass and the wildflowers have been able to survive there.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
really fun.
Yeah, interesting stuff, because there's very little of that kind of land left. Very little. I mean, up in Dallas County, there's a little bit on the northeast side of White Rock Lake that's never been plowed. But the difference between, if you've been out to the Kachina Prairie or if you're going to go out now, the difference between what you'll see in a couple of months when everything's starting to sprout out and what you would see as you're driving down the road looking at the cattle in the fields and what they're on is night and day. It's very different, it's different uses and so forth. But yeah, it's the pastures are not prairies. Prairies are extremely diverse with their animals and plants both. Next. Okay, now so 20-ish thousand years ago, maybe 25. I mean, there's still ongoing research and still new discoveries going on in terms of how early did man end up in North and South America. Pretty interesting stuff. I mean, when I was in school, it was 11,000 years ago with Clovis and that kind of thing. Now they've uncovered more stuff, even down into South America, that's more like 20,000 years ago plus. Evidence of people. So somewhere 25-ish thousand years ago, people came probably over the land bridge, and that was because of the glaciation that was going on. So the more you have continental glaciers and ice ages, the lower the sea level gets, right? So during that time, the sea level was much lower, and so that whole area up there was land, and people were migrating across and then coming on down. And where they went is pretty complex. I mean, Some of them went north and became the Inuit. Some of them ended up in the middle to northern, U.S. and Canada regions. Some of them ended up farther down in the southern U.S. and then on down into Central America and so forth. So you had people coming down in there. The folks. The reason I mention it is because a lot of times people will say, well, it's what we've done to the prairie is not that different than what Native Americans did to the prairie because they burned the prairie a lot, that kind of thing. So certainly the people, if you show the next slide, I mean, humans had a lot to do with altering their environment. The earliest ones that were coming through between 7 to 20,000 years ago probably killed off all of the megafauna, all of the big animals, because we used to have a lot more large animals like the mastodons and mammoths. We used to have, I mean, all kinds of stuff actually. Even lions. There was a lot of stuff. So people ate them all. I mean, that's probably what happened. The ones that, like the lions and things like that, the American lions and predators, those were killed off, of course, probably because of fear, which I can understand. But all the big stuff probably got killed off over time to eat, because that's usually what happens, right? So there certainly was, Paleo-Indian influence onto the environment itself. The reason I mention that is because, your megafauna has a lot to do. Your megafauna can really affect what is in your ecosystem, whether it's prairie or somewhere else. I mean, who here knows locust thorn trees for honey locust, right? Do you ever wonder, it's like, why are horse apples, for example? Why are those honey locusts coated in thorns this long? What's the deal there? There's nothing that could affect that. Evolutionarily speaking, why would they have done that? It was because back when there were camels and camelids and so forth, before early man killed everything off, those organisms could get to they could get through a lot of the thorns, and they could eat a lot of the materials off of the honey locusts and so forth, because camelids and so forth have extremely tough mouths, so they could do that. Well, same with horse apples. It's like, what eats horse apples? Not a lot. I mean, there's seeds in horse apple, right? And you'll find them sometimes discombobulated, where some squirrel sat there and picked through the entire horse apple to get the seeds out, right? So there's some things that'll eat it here and there, but most of the horse apples you've seen, they just kind of pile up and rot, and then by January they're mostly gone. But nothing actually used them. Well, when there was megafauna, there were things, the giant ground sloths and so forth, there were things that ate that stuff. But now they're remnants, they're leftovers, and so they evolved all these defenses and all these ways of dealing with the megafauna, but the megafauna are no longer there. Does that make sense? Everybody okay with that? Okay, all right, next. All right, so certainly the Paleo-Indians would have tried their best to get the big bison, but bison were one of the few things that managed to stick around, even though there were Native Americans and Paleo Americans that would have been trying to kill them for food as much as they could. Next, okay, and then on into modern Native Americans too. Plenty of Native American tribes all over, and all over the U.S., but all over the Great Plains, that would have been doing all kinds of different things in their environment, including burning. The prairies in general are a fire regime type of ecosystem, so they normally burn every so often, depending on where you are. You guys remember the big Panhandle fire from like almost 2 years ago now? About 2 years ago? So I remember watching you watch the news on that, and the news people are just going nuts, because it's like this, it's ruined, it's destroyed, and so forth and so on. It's like, who here's done any prescribed burns? Anybody done any prescribed burns? Where you burn your fields, or folks that burned their fields when you were young, the old timers that burn their fields every year. So burning grasslands is complete. The grass loves that, actually. The grass is like, please do that again next year, that kind of thing, or at least every 2 or 3 years, because it gets rid of a lot of the older material up top, the cellulose and lignin and so forth, that hasn't degraded yet, and it frees up all those nutrients for the roots below, right? So burning in grassland, I knew I've done a couple of burns on my property in Rains County, and the first one I did, I didn't tell my mom what I was doing, and so when she came out and saw what had happened to this 20-acre area that was all black after, she wasn't happy with me at all. She said some things that I won't repeat, but the thing is, though, I did it in January, and if you want to ever do prescribed burns, you should get a lot of training first, because burns are scary. They are very scary things if they go wrong. They are really dangerous. But generally speaking, if you're doing low temperature, humid days, no or low wind, et cetera, you can get a good burn. I mean, the old timers did it all the time here in Texas. All the time. They burned every year. Most people, right? So as long as you pick the right day and so forth, and you're ready and you know what you're doing, it can be done safely. But of course, Mom was like, "It's all black. It's all ruined." The reporter from Amarillo, "It's gone. It's ruined. It's destroyed." So I told Mom, I was like, "It's all right. Just give me 6 weeks." 6 weeks, because I did it at the end of January. I said, by the 1st of March, it's going to be all green and beautiful, and you'll never know it happened. And so she was doubtful, but that's what happened, because it was beautiful. 6 weeks later, everything's popping out, and everything's happy, because you got rid of all the overburden. So it was normal for Indians to do that kind of thing, and it's normal for the prairies to burn. It's just that when we get in there and build our house and then wonder why it burned down, it's like, well, that's kind of on us for not doing the research, because that's what happens. I mean, prairies do that. So it's rough stuff. Okay, next. All right. Now, the first European expedition out through here, this is around 1820. So remember, we had the Louisiana Purchase in 1803-ish. Check me if is that right? 1803, okay. Louisiana Purchase. All right, and Lewis and Clark was sent up to check out everything to see what did we buy, right? What did we buy? If you can imagine that, right? And a few years later, the less famous Long expedition, all right, in 1820, it's this greenish one, the 1819 to 1820 that I'm interested in. That's one that went across the Great Plains in 3 different areas, went across it all. Long's Peak outside of Denver is named after that guy. But other than that, that's probably the only place you'd ever see that guy's name, probably, right? So he didn't get the airtime, so to speak, as that Lewis and Clark got. All right, but anyway, he went across there in 1819 and 1820, okay? And next, he found that it was pretty sparse in terms of what they would like. They were, European Americans were coming from the east. Lots of woods, plenty of rainfall, topography, very different. When he got out there onto the plains, there were hardly any trees, not a lot of rainfall, and he labeled it the Great American Desert. He called it in his report the Great American Desert, because there were no trees and didn't seem like a lot of rain. So not knowing that there was actually a lot of life and a lot of biodiversity, he called it a desert, the Great American Desert. Okay, next. Okay, so, and I love this quote. He says, he put in the report, it says, this area is unfit for cultivation and, of course, uninhabitable by a people depending upon agriculture. That was in the report. So, next. So that delayed settlement for quite a while, for decades, several decades. People read the report and they're like, oh, I don't think we should go out there, And not to mention there were Native Americans that might not be happy with you being there either. So it was like, why should we go? It doesn't look like a good thing. But once the railroads came in, things began to change. Of course. Okay, next. So there was plenty of bison when the railroads first got completed. Plenty of bison doing what they would normally do on Great Plains and prairies, so forth. All right, next. All right, but then we killed almost all of them off. Of course, those are, I don't know if you can tell, but that's a mountain of bison skulls, right? So we did a lot of damage there. We removed the upwards of 60 million bison within really almost a decade. Removed tens of millions of bison. So we began altering the ecosystem at that point quite a lot. The European Americans coming across, we began. And just as a little flashback for the next part, the cattle, there were bison, but then the bison get wiped out. Then there were cattle, right? The first cattle probably came up with Alonso de Leon, who had brought them up from Mexico to supply the missions that the Spanish were building all through East Texas. I mean, from San Antonio on into East Texas and on up, right? The missions were there. They were building those in the late 17th century because they wanted to have something there so that the French wouldn't think that they could just come on over and maybe colonize this too. So the Spanish were like, no, see, we're here already. See our missions? We're here. And look, see, there's cattle. We have a supply. It's already colonized. So you guys stay over in the Mississippi and let the bon temps rouler over there in New Orleans and, stay over there, right? So he probably brought them over. If you read about those times and so forth, it's interesting that a lot of the things that they brought up, some of it they kept in, the mission, yard, the mission, within the mission area. But a lot of stuff they just sort of let go, right? Especially hogs, right? Which are now we deal with in terms of feral hogs all the time, right? But hogs, they just bring a lot of them up and just let them go in the bottoms and so forth. And then when it was time to go, harvest some hogs, off they went into the bottoms to hunt for the hogs they'd let go, right? So to them, that was perfectly fine. You just bring all the animals you want. And the English did it too, of course, when they were exploring the world, when Britannia ruled the seas in the 19th century. They would always leave hogs. A lot of times they would leave chickens, roosters and chickens and so forth, and a couple of goats. They would leave those on islands regularly when they would go through, so that when the next English ships came through later, who knows when, there would be stuff for them there to eat. Yeah. So we ruined all kinds of native biodiversity for that, that kind of thing. It was very common practice. Anyway, okay, next. Okay, so the Spanish brought in these cattle, and then they were, of course, the precursors to what became the Texas Longhorns, all right? The Texas Longhorns, as I mentioned, these cattle would get let go, and some would still be semi-tame, but some of them just went wild. I mean, became wild cattle. And so people hunted them just like they'd hunt wild hogs. They'd hunt the wild cattle, right? During the Civil War, when a lot of the menfolk were off fighting, okay, a lot of the herds of the wild cattle, as well as the domestic herds, but a lot of the semi-wild herds of longhorns just exploded in population. I mean, it was just, there was nobody there to harvest them. And, 5-ish years worth of unchecked growth meant lots of cows by the time they came back, right? Lots of cattle. Next. Okay, so that then gave rise to the cattle boom decade of the 1870s and on into the 1880s, okay? So, because, they came after the war, people came back and they're like, oh my gosh, look at all these cows. What should we do with all these cows, right? What kind of meat were the Northerners eating at that time mostly? What do you think? Do you know what kind of meat was normal for them to eat most often? Pork. Yeah, it was pork. Beef was because of this time period and after, right? So once people that had the means, began to say, okay, look, we got all these beeves, right? The cattle ready to eat and nobody here to eat them. So we have to drive these cows somewhere and get them to a market so that they can be bought and slaughtered and consumed, right? So that's what started all the big cattle drive period. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. So the cattle boom, right? A good, dozen years, 20 at the very most, right? Had that time period that you see in the movies all the time of cattle drives and that kind of thing, the cowboys, all that kind of good stuff. That was the time period for that. They had basically, especially in the 70s, 1870s, open range. There was no fence. So there was some famous saying, there's no fence between, Dalhart and the Canadian border. We just drive the cattle wherever we want, right? There was no barbed wire yet, right? So there was no fence, and so when Charles Goodnight and those guys began to organize these big cattle drives up to Kansas and beyond to the railroads, all right, then they could just do that. There was no, I mean, can you imagine trying to do a cattle drive now from here to Kansas? You're gonna wear out some wire cutters. Let me tell you, right? You know what I mean, right? And I think it's still, I don't know, somebody that's a lawyer might help. I think it's still illegal to carry wire, the big wire cutters across county lines or across 2 county lines or something like that in Texas. It's one of the old laws on the book still, because because people for rustling and so forth, right? So I think that's one of the old laws that hasn't been revoked yet. Okay, next. There were a bunch of the famous trails, the Chisholm Trail and so forth, for example. They had the Goodnight Trail over into New Mexico. So they were trying to get up to all of the different railroads and to take that beef out to Chicago and New York and so forth, but especially Chicago, because that's where all the beef packing industries really exploded in the late 19th century. All right, okay, next. If you're interested in that very specific time period, that's the book you want to get right there, because you guys are the Historical Heritage Society, so I figured you might want to know which books to get for the history parts of all this. That's a great book. The only books I ever recommend are books that I've read and that I liked and that were readable. That's one of the things with kids. It's like if you try and get them to read a book that's not very readable, it's just going to end badly. You know what I mean? So you got to find the ones that are well written and interestingly written. That's a great book. You won't want to put it down, right? Yeah, great book for that time period. Very interesting stuff. Anyway, so that was there, and the cattle basically they don't treat the prairie exactly like bison. Not exactly, but they're ruminants. I mean, they graze on the grass, so it was similar. Ecologically, not the same, but similar. So the Great Plains were made for this kind of thing. They were just made for it, basically. Okay, they were made for the bison, but we'll go with the cattle since the bison were almost all gone, right? So that went really well. The cowboys, the ranchers, all those people that were up on the Great Plains, the high plains, the mixed grass plains, and so forth, knew that when people started coming out, the sod busters, when they started coming out to farm, they knew that was a bad idea, right? Because there's not enough rain, generally speaking. There's just not enough rain. And there's not enough dependable water source, generally speaking, right? A lot of the creeks and all, they go dry in the summers, right? But the cattle, they can handle that. I mean, to them, that's why there was so much animosity. To them, it's like this prairie is for cows. And so when people would come out and bust up the sod, especially when they started getting better and better at busting up the sod and in their mind ruining it, right? That was that's why all those westerns, Shane and all that, is like water and about the farming versus the ranching. That's where all that history comes from, is that conflict. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, next. Okay, now, the cattle kingdom, that time period, went really well for a while, but just like everything, it collapsed during the 1880s for several different reasons. Number one, people got greedy, right? And it wasn't necessarily the folks from the Great Plains or Texas or anything like that. They had people from Europe, the royal people. Royalty were dukes and barons were coming over and buying up huge herds and huge ranches, and they wanted to be cowboys too, And I mean literally. I'm not just saying it's like there was this one guy. No, there were many. They would come over and think, I'm a cowboy, right? Only in German or something like that, right? And so they overstocked. Now the Native Americans, I mean not the Indians, but the cattle, the cowboys and so on, they were doing it too. But they had a little better idea of how much overstocking you might get away with versus, people who had no idea and it was just like, buy another 1,000 cattle and put them there, that kind of thing, right? So there was overstocking that over several years degraded the prairie a lot. Okay, increased competition when sheep herders and then the settlers started coming through to bust up the land. The lower prices then occurred when they figured out how to have refrigerated cars or refrigerated railway cars, right? In the 1880s. I always think of refrigeration as a 20th century thing, but it was earlier, right? I mean, in certain places, right? So refrigeration that began to depress the prices. And then in 1885 to 86, the winter, there was one really bad winter and another one following it was pretty bad that killed off. I mean, I want to say a majority. It's in the book if you read The Cattle Kingdom. It killed off most of the cow, not 90%, but like 60-ish, 70% of the cows in those big herds, especially in the northern parts of the Great Plains. The cows were killed off by terrible, terrible winters. Terrible winters. So the combination of those things sort of ended that time period, the Cattle Kingdom time period. But it was just in time for the sodbusters to really start coming out. And what helped the sodbusters on their way was the government, because the government was like, we need more people. Well, we need people to, like go west, and we need people to go west and settle so that, everybody else knows we are here, don't come to try and settle either. We're already here. So they began to do the Homestead Act, different Homestead Acts, right? So there were a number of Homestead Acts from, if you go to the next one, number of Homestead Acts, 62 might have been the first one, but there was another one between 62 and 1904, 1904, 1909. There were a number of these Homestead Acts, either for all the Great Plains or portions of the Great Plains during that 40-ish year period that began. The first one was before the cattle boom. That's what gave rise to all the conflict, right? But the ones afterwards were after the cattle boom. So the government was like, wow, there's all this land out there. We need people to go out there and make use of it and make something of it, right? Now the amount of sheer just ignorance that was displayed during this time, during these times. The flyers would go out and just say, it's like, this place is a paradise. You got to come out here. You get 160 acres or whatever that particular land rush was giving you, right? You get all this land. It's like Eden. It's like, who wouldn't come out here? And then, of course, they get out there and there was this, there wasn't anything that was in the flyer at all. Well, there weren't trees. There weren't forests. And so a lot of people didn't last a year, not even a year, right? I think for that first Homestead Act, 1862, which was mostly more than the northern Great Plains, I think they only had about a 40% success rate over a 10-year period. So it's people would get out there, and people would freeze to death. It was awful. It was really hard existence, right? Not what the flyer said at all, right? Okay, next. Okay, so, and then give me the next one too to put up. So you can go ahead and hit it one more time too for me. So they'd put these flyers like this. Now the reason I put this one up is not because I'm insensitive. Okay, it's because it's an irony that a lot of the bills had this kind of thing that said, oh yeah, Indian land, come and get it. Say we've got lots of Indian land. It's ironic because when Long went out there in 1820, a couple of the big chiefs that he met with at the time told him they're not really concerned about the white people coming to take their land because it's not what the white people are going to want. There's not enough rain. You can't farm it. We're not worried, is what he was saying. And then the irony, it was this, years later, was like, we're giving everything you've got, we're giving it all, we're selling it all, right? So the thing was, though, he was partially right, of course, the Indian chief. He was right. It's an extremely difficult land to farm. But if you have a really good decade or two, you can do well for a little while. you know. But weather changes, right? Everybody knows we're from Texas. Weather changes over years. Next. Okay, so there were some odd ideas. I just want to put a couple of these in your head before we get on to the next part. There were some odd ideas because when people started coming out and realizing this place is harsh. This is a hard place to live in. There's not a lot of rain. There's no trees to build houses with. There's no trees for fuel. I mean, this is a really hard place. But people began to come up with these ideas that were not based on any science at all. But one of them had to do with trees. They said, oh, if you plant trees, that'll make it rain more. That was an actual idea that was put out there. You know, it's like, okay, all right, plant more trees. That'll make it rain. There's no connection at all to that at all, right? Okay. So next, there was another one. This one here, all right, said Godspeed the plow by this wonderful provision, which is only man's mastery over nature. The clouds are dispensing copious rains. The plow is the instrument which separates civilization from savagery and converts a desert into a farm or garden. That's where the rain follows the plow saying came from, was that, right? So they thought that if you plowed up the ground, it would make it rain more. Yeah. But again, on no actual science at all, they just felt like that's probably what would happen. Yeah. But it doesn't have anything to do with that. In fact, it usually makes it worse because then when you plow up all the ground, then the ground dries out, and then there's even less moisture in the soil to evaporate and get into the air anymore, right? Okay, next. Okay, now, so these Homestead Acts, you know, people came out. It was a hard life. And if you're interested in all of those kinds of the stories, you know, nothing beats like the David Burns documentary on PBS for you know, the Dust Bowl. David Burns documentary is just, I mean, if you want the human aspect of the story, you can't miss with that, right? It's hard to watch over time. I mean, it's just tragic, you know, tragic. But it sure made for some great pictures to look at later, and for us to kind of look at and just go, oh my gosh, right? So next, all right. So these guys, a lot of these guys, they lived in dugout homes, right? There were so few trees that there wasn't enough lumber to make a house or even a log cabin or planks or anything. So they would just dig into the hillsides. And then a lot of times just do. I mean, they'd make mud bricks if they could, if they knew how. Make mud bricks and build up the walls that way and put up some sort of whatever roof they could manage. And it wasn't just these guys. You know, the first male settlers that came out, families. You know, the women, the children. They would all have these sort of dugout homes up in the panhandle of Texas, Oklahoma panhandle, on up into Kansas, Nebraska. That was a normal home for years. Lots of times I'm sure the husband was like, it's like, it'll just be for a little while, honey. It'll just be for a few months. And then like 6 years later, she's still sweeping out because it's a dirt floor. And a lot of the descriptions from the time period, there were always critters that were get in, right? There were snakes always coming in. There were centipedes all the time. There was all kinds of. There was always life in there that you didn't want in your house, right? So it was a hard life, in a hard place, right? Next, okay, that's another dugout. I could just stare at these pictures for so long just to look at these people and just imagine what were they thinking? What were they going through? What was life really like to live? I mean, when you look at the little boy, these little boys here, and just wonder, it's like, wow. Of course, they were young enough. They probably, that was normal to them. So maybe they might have had the easier time of it. But a lot of times, you notice, and I know it's probably because the exposure time for pictures back in the old days was a lot longer. So they didn't smile as much because it was harder to hold a smile for a long time for a photo. But when you look at a lot of the photos and people are they've just got this look on their face and you're just thinking, they're miserable. I look at some of my ancestors' photos, from down outside of Waxahachie and over in East Texas, and they are not smiling. I mean, and maybe it was because of the photo thing, but I don't know. They look haggard. You know what I mean? It is not, it's rough. Okay, next. I mean, what a life. She's picking up the buffalo chips for fuel, because it's like there was no wood to burn, so that was their fuel. I mean, literally, it's like you're gonna, roast up whatever your man got to kill that, if he got a deer maybe, who knows what, but it's going to be roasted on buffalo chips, so enjoy. I mean, and it's not that big a deal. Mostly buffalo chips, just like cow chips. I mean, it's mostly the undigested hay. So as long as it's weathered, as long as you've left it alone long enough, I mean, all the other stuff's going to be gone, and it's mostly just cellulose. But still, it's kind of like parts that certain something to the I don't know. All right, next. Okay. So that photo is one of the only photos from the I think that was from the Oklahoma land rush. So that was one of the later 19th century ones. And again, it's just you just get people out there, coming in just herds, almost literally, right? And the whole point, the whole job of theirs was to farm. That's what they were going to do, was farm, which meant they had to bust up the soil, right? Next. Okay, now, they were farming, they discovered, it was well known already, of course, but they discovered that wheat was a good crop because for the Great Plains, because it could handle, if you get 20 inches of rainfall in a year, that's enough for wheat, as long as it does not come in one day. I mean, But as long as you're getting around 20 inches for the season, wheat can deal with that. A lot of crops can't, but we could, and we could handle the altitude of the Great Plains and so forth. So wheat was a pretty good crop. So they were growing a lot of wheat out in the Great Plains. Lots and lots of wheat in the 1900s, 1890s, began into the 1900s, and then when World War I started, all right, and the Turks cut off the wheat supply from the Dardanelles, from Ukraine and all those areas, okay, then our government said to our farmers in the Great Plains, here's your shot, because they can't get wheat. They need wheat for the war effort. And of course, we didn't get into the war until the last year and a half or so. But we were supplying Europe with wheat during World War I, which meant we were plowing up a lot of land in the Great Plains for the wheat that was needed for the war effort. And of course, once we got into it, of course, then it was even more of an important thing, a patriotic thing, to grow that wheat for the war effort, right? So we turned a lot of soil during the 1910s, right? Next. Okay. It was called the Big Plow Up. There's 1915. Notice these guys they're still pulling the storage with horses. But what came along during the 1910s? The motorized vehicle, right? Tractors. Next. Okay. Oh, back to this part. So 1917, just to give you an idea, we had 45 million acres of wheat harvested in 1917, and then next, by 1990, 75 million acres. Yeah, 75. So when they said the Big Plow Up, they meant it. It's the Big Plow Up, right? They started plowing everything they possibly could. All right, next. Okay, now, so during the war, all right, so here you got from 1910 or so to 1920. So during the war, all right, wheat prices per bushel just went up and stayed up. So people got really used to making a good living off of growing wheat in the Panhandle and north on up. I mean, for a good while, right? And then during the late teens and into the 20s, they were having good rainfalls. So they kept growing wheat into the 1920s. It was a good decade for rainfall. Next. Okay. During the war and slightly after in the early 20s, Congress came along and they were like, I'll tell you what, all right, we'll make it where, you get federal loans, low interest rates on loans for more land to plow up, right? Banks were coming into it, 40-year loans at 6%, $5,000 loan had payments less than $35 a month. Can you imagine that? Now it is like, what? Right? Okay, so the government and business really began to push plowing more up, right? Because for a few years, there was a lot of money to be made by doing that for a few years. And so they were like, get on it. Let's do it. Let's throw gas on the fire. And they did, right? Next. Okay. This guy, Milton Whitney, was a chief of the Bureau of Soils in the late teens. This is the quote: "The soil is the one indestructible, immutable asset that the nation possesses." So I don't think he was an ag person. I don't think he was a soil scientist, because nobody in their right mind would say that today, right? But that's the way they felt. Not unlike when the Europeans first came to the eastern U.S., they thought that the forest was forever. It's like there's no way we could ever cut all these trees down, right? Yeah.
Just real quick though, a lot of the Europeans that moved into the hill country of Texas.
Yeah, the Germans especially.
So forth,
Yeah.
they understood soil
Yeah.
conservation.
Uh-huh.
They were farmers.
Yeah. Yep.
They
Should have come up and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they understood that.
Yeah.
They knew
They
how to maintain their
they did
farm.
a really good job. I just finished a book that now I wish I'd remember the name of it, but it went through a lot of the German history in central Texas in the 19th century, and I knew there were some German settlers and so forth. You've been to Fredericksburg, but I had no idea that there were as many as actually came over, and they were doing a great job. The account I was reading, a first-person account of a person going through. It was the person that designed Central Park. Gosh, I'm blanking on his name. His name will come to me later. What's that? Homestead. Yeah. He wrote an account. He traveled through the South and into Texas, and then back in the middle of the 19th century, and wrote about the difference between, and I hate to say it because a lot of my family's from East Texas, but he wasn't kind to the East Texas. And I look at the pictures of my ancestors and I kind of like, yeah, I can see, But when he got to the German settlements, though, he would talk about it. It's like we had real bread. I mean, from with flour. I mean, real bread. That things were clean. Whereas when he was coming through my part of the country, it was like he was lucky to get cornbread and pork jowls. I mean, that was about all they seemed to be eating in East Texas when I don't know, in the middle of the century. I don't know, because that was all my family. So anyway, the Germans, they were on it. They were on it. We could have learned a lot from them. That's for sure. Oof. And I hate to say it's like, why couldn't we do it ourselves? But that's why diversity is so important. There's so much to learn from so many different sources, so many different people. It's like, why would you turn your back on that? Next. Okay, so to continue this code, it's the one resource that cannot be exhausted, that cannot be used up. Can you imagine? Oh, wow, right? All right, next. Okay, but then the mechanical tractors came along. Right? Henry Ford, all right, comes up with the Fordson Model F in 1917. Don't you love the metal wheels, right? Those metal wheels. Can you imagine riding on that thing? I don't know. Oh, that'd be tough, wouldn't it? Right? So the motor, all right, next. All right, John Deere, a few years later, Model D for John Deere. So these beasts of tractors, all right, were developed and unleashed on the Great Plains, right? Because before that, if you go next, all right, before that, it was all about horses and mules and people, right? So in the 1830s, without the tractors, 58 hours to work to plant and harvest 1 acre. you know? 1 acre, about a football field's worth of space, right? Okay, next. Okay, all of it. By hand, horses. I mean, it was so much work, so much work. My grandma, who was born in 1911, she was married when she was 15, and luckily she lived long enough for me to be old enough to be able to ask her in a polite way, like, so why did you get married when you were 15, you know? And she said, I just wanted to leave home. It was so hard. You know, they were farming outside of Emory in Rains County, and it was a farming family, and there were 4 daughters, and they were they were the hands, you know, they were the workers. And she said, I just wanted to leave the house. I mean, I wanted to leave that work. It was so hard. So yeah, it changed the rest of us nowadays. Like, I'm going to go start the tractor up. It's like, well, which I love. I love my tractor, you know. All right, next. Okay, so by 1930, it took 3 hours to do the same job on 1 acre. 3 hours. Just an amazing difference. But that meant, yeah, you had the power, you had the equipment to really do some damage, right, in the Great Plains. Next.
Another thing that's worth mentioning with that is that you no longer needed half of your acreage just to feed the livestock that worked the land.
Mm-hmm.
So you had all this additional acreage that came into the crop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
It flooded the market at depressed prices.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love this, the one-way plow, I forget the millboard plow, or something. I forget the name of it. There's a name for that. But anyway, these particular kind of plows would plow into the earth, and they would turn the sod completely over, right? What was it? Yes, yeah, that's that. Yeah, and it would turn the sod over, what the old folks would call the wrong side up, right? The ranchers would say, that's the wrong side up. Right? My cattle can't eat off the dirt. Anyway, so when they developed that plow and they had the tractors to pull it, oh man, you could really open up the prairie. Okay? All right, next. So I mean, literally millions of acres were plowed during the late teens and into the 20s, well into the 20s. Millions and millions of acres were plowed. All right, prices stayed relatively stable. All right, next. Okay, so that's the 1910s and 20s saw wetter than normal conditions, right? But then when the war ended, all right, the war ended, there was a bit of a dip, but during the 20s when everything was going well, it came back up and stayed up here, all right, right. It wasn't as much as during the war, but it was still, they got used to this other price, $1.50 per barrel, per bushel, sorry. Okay, they even had these folks that would come down, the suitcase farmers during the 20s, that would come down and buy some land, have it plowed up and planted in wheat, and then take off to whatever else they were doing, somewhere else in the country, and come back at harvest time and have somebody harvest it for them and make good money. And they made good money because the rain was good and consistent for long enough, right? But these suitcase farmers, they were just, complete business folks. They didn't live in the area. They just came through and took advantage of the situation, right? But that meant there was just that much more plowing going on. Next. Okay. Boise City, for example, up in the panhandle of Oklahoma, 28 inches of rainfall between 1911 and 1923, an average of 28 inches of rainfall per year during those years, which is nearly 10 inches above its normal average, right? Anybody been through Boise City, right? So we think of it as Boise, like Boise, Idaho or whatever. So the name, it was supposed to be bois, for the French for trees. It was started by some hucksters. The city itself, Boise City, these two guys, it was like the only two guys that ended up getting convicted and sent to jail for land fraud during this time period. They made all these flyers and said, oh my God, Boise, this place is full of there's trees, there's a library, there's a blah, 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 blah. And they sold lots, to these northerners who eventually then got brought down on the train and dumped out into this place And there was none of that there. There was none of that there. There was no roads. There was no water supply. There was no, I mean, of course, but some of them made a go of it anyway, and it's still there. But I don't know. I've been through there, and it's like, I'm happy to live in East Texas. I'm just saying, it's a hard life up there. It's the Great Plains, all right. Anyway, so next, okay. So here's what one of the state senators said in 1928: Panhandle of Oklahoma is destined to be the greatest wheat growing country in the world. Right? People were short-sighted. People did not think long-term. People did not think of natural cycles and natural methods, nothing like that. Next. Okay. No, that's the development company. Yeah, established Boise City, Oklahoma. Sold lots based on all these false promises. Paved streets, an artesian well. Yeah, but they went to jail. So it was some of the few people that ever got convicted for the fraud, because there was a lot of the fraud. There was a lot of fraud. I was surprised at how many people were it was normal just to buy land sight unseen and then go to it. Yeah, I can't imagine that now, right? Next. Okay, so summer of 29, the war had long ended. Population was growing, but not that great. The Ukraine, Dardanelles, all those, they were back in business. They were producing wheat too. So what happened in the late 20s then was that a surplus of wheat began to build up. Like 28, 29, 30, there was just more wheat building up, and then no one who was willing to buy it. And of course, that meant the price of the wheat crashed. It went down. Next. Okay. So here's your, so they had really high prices, 28, 29, 30, and then whoosh, right like that. All right. During the 31, 32, 33, just straight down, because no one had bought the wheat from these years by here. That was all still at the loading docks in huge piles. No one would buy it. There was too much, way too much. Next. So the farmers, they had a choice to make. If they were going to stay in business, then they should they grow something else, or should they try and grow twice as much wheat so they can make the same amount at half the price? So they picked the twice as much wheat. So more plowing continued. So go ahead next. So yeah, so they just decided, well, we gotta plow up more and plant more wheat so we can make up for the low price. Next. Okay, 50,000 acres per day in 29 to 31. 50,000 acres per day. Next. All right. So here, that's when you start getting to your super low prices. Okay, and then of course in 1929 when the stock market crashed in October, for the first year or two that didn't really affect the farmers out here. They were like, that's a northern problem, a city problem. But of course, if it meant that they couldn't afford to buy any more of what you were growing, then it became the farming problem too, right? Which is what happened. Okay. All right. Next. Okay. So then all of the prerequisites had been completed, all the plowing and so forth, for Mother Nature to finally come along and put a nail in this coffin. And that began as the drought of the 1930s. So when the rains began to taper off, then you could plant and so forth, but there wasn't even enough rain for wheat to develop, to do well. So then during the 30s, everything just continued to dry up and dry up. The soil was dry. It just got drier. It had also been compacted, of course. If you have any ag experience at all, if you compact the soil, then you just end up, if there's no moisture left, now it's literally just turning into dust that to make it back into soil is going to take even more work because you compacted it and it's dry. Does that make sense? Right? Okay, next. Okay, so the winds picked up and people during the early 30s began leaving, and of course then you get that whole period, the time period, the grapes of wrath time period and so forth, where people were just pulling up and leaving. A lot of people were trying to stay. A lot of people stuck it out, but it was not pleasant. I mean, it wasn't. there were hardly any. There was no success stories in agriculture in the Dust Bowls during the or especially 30 to 38 or so. There was no, it was just bad. I mean, for year after year after year. Next, okay. So then the Dust Bowl time period, that decade that is famous, began to occur, and you begin to have what they call the black dusters, where a lot of that soil that had been exposed over years and turned over and compacted and dried out and turned over and compacted and dried out, the winds and so forth just began to blow it away, I didn't put any numbers because pretty quickly the numbers just become meaningless because they're just so large. I mean, if you look at how much soil would blow away in any one of these events, we're talking about, millions of tons of soil per event would just blow east. It was just inconceivable. So the numbers become meaningless. It was so much. Next. Okay. Yeah, it's just, I can't imagine. We've all seen sometimes when, you get the big winds from West Texas and the skies will kind of get that yellowish, reddish color and so forth. And that's interesting. Look at the pretty sunset, But to be in those, that's rough stuff. And they could tell where the wind was coming from by the color, because if it was, the yellows and so forth, it's probably more from New Mexico and West Texas, and reds from Oklahoma. The black ones more from a little farther north, where they had more of the organic material from the loess. But just to be in those, though, would have, it's rough stuff. My grandma, one of my grandmas, she would always, she was born and raised in East Texas, but even down there, we're not technically part of where the Dust Bowl occurred, but we still had the dust flying over all the time. So when I was a little kid and we'd eat over there at Mima's, right? She would always, we'd set everything out, we'd get everything out, and we'd have the prayer. And after the prayer, she'd say, "All right, turn up and help yourselves," And I didn't really think anything about that, but as a kid, I just wanted that chicken before somebody else got it. I wanted the pulley bone before somebody else got it. And I wanted to make sure I had enough gravy for my so I didn't really pay much attention, but she always said that, right? And so luckily, again, I finally asked her, Mima, why do you say that? And she said when she was a kid that there was so much dust that when they set the table, that they would put the plates face down. And so by the time they had all the food to the table and everything and had the prayer, then after the prayer, her mom would say, "Turn up and help yourselves." And that way you wouldn't have dust on the plate by the time it was time to eat. So I was like, wow, amazing, just incredible. But these, again, the David Burns, if you want to know more about the personal aspects of experiencing this, that David Burns documentary is unbeatable. Just unbeatable, describing how people would put the wet blankets over the windows and under the doors and so forth, trying to keep the dust from coming in, but to little avail, little effect, right? Yep. Next. Okay. So yeah, Dust Bowl, it's rough. It's just a rough life, terrible life. Next. Yeah, suitcase farmer feel. Everybody just lots of people just left, and especially those guys. Next. Okay. So this quote comes from a book that I would also recommend that David Burns used. He interviewed this guy quite extensively for his documentary. And if you go next, it'll show the book too, The Worst Hard Time. So if you want to know more about the Dust Bowl and the social side of what happened, especially in the Panhandle of Texas and Panhandle of Oklahoma and southeastern Colorado, that book right there, it's another one of those that you just won't want to put down. Even though parts of it it's just hard to read chapter after chapter because it's just horrendous what happened to people, what they had to go through. But he put it right. The tractors had they'd done what no hailstorm, no blizzard, no tornado, no drought, no epic siege of frost, no prairie fire, nothing in the natural history of the Southern Plains had ever done, right? They turned, go ahead next, right? They'd removed the prairie grass. Yeah, go ahead.
When did the Dust Bowl end?
So around 38-ish, 37, 38 is when the began to start having rains again to enough to begin to re-humidify everything. Does that make sense? But it was the early, 30 through 36 was the worst part. I mean, very low rain and huge amounts of the big dust storms where they lost a lot of the soil. But by 38, 39, things began to turn around. Yeah, right before World War II.
You've never seen a dust storm. I was in the early 50s, I was in West Texas.
Uh-huh.
Dad had a cotton gin out there, and his brother had another cotton gin. And I was out there, and you couldn't see as far as from here to the wall.
Yeah,
there.
yeah,
And my aunt took towels,
yeah,
took sheets, wrapped around the door,
Yeah.
wet.
yeah,
Next morning, you could write your hand on it.
yeah, yeah. Just it's like a lot of those natural disasters. Until you've been in it, it's hard to imagine how bad it really is.
When you saw it in the afternoon when it was coming,
Yeah,
we didn't know what it was. We
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
know anything.
yeah.
We lived here,
yeah,
and
yeah. What?
it was totally different.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to wrap your head around. Definitely. Next. Okay. So yeah, we destroyed the prairie, right? Because before before we plowed up the prairie, the grasses, the diverse types of grasses could hold the soil in place through the decades-long droughts and the fires and everything else. But when we turned over the sod and we killed off all the native prairie grasses, I mean, this is a picture of a guy. This is from here down is roots. This part over here is wheat. So if you're actually next, yeah. So there's a close-up. So that on the right, they planted wheat, so you could see the difference between the annual crop roots and the perennial prairie grasses. It's a big difference, right? So we basically enabled that decade-long drought to blow away a lot of the soil that had taken literally millions of years to form there. All right, next. Okay, so there's your list of, this is how many of the black dusters per year. So 14 and 32 and so on. So it just I mean, you can't imagine living through that. I mean, I just can't imagine. The health-wise, the young and the old, of course, were the ones that were the most affected. The cattle and so forth also would die off. They'd get what was called the dust pneumonia, right? Because there was so much dust and they'd breathe in, and then of course you have moisture in your lungs, so that dust would turn to mud basically in your lungs, and then you'd have pneumonia. And if you kept the exposure going, people just died of the pneumonia, of the dust pneumonia, because there was no way to get around it. So yeah, people would they go to school with their masks on, and I just love the lunch buckets, right? Yeah, I love that. Yeah, the dust. It's just horrendous. They'd say when they cut the dead cows open, or cut the lungs open, it was just mud in their lungs. Next. Yeah, so they had the worst time of it. The little fellows and the old folks would have the worst time because of the condition of their lungs and in development. Next. All right. So yeah. So from the worst hard time, this quote, the whole experiment of trying to trick a part of the country into being something it was never meant to be was a colossal failure. And it's interesting because lots of people had said this isn't the place for this. It was just that you had a really good decade or two, and people that's why history, that's why historical society, that's why history is so important, is so that you don't make the mistake that if you'd just listened to the old timers about what's going on here, you could have avoided. I mean, it's so important, right? Can you imagine how much farther we'd be along if I know personally I had to learn a lot of lessons the hard way, even though my old timers would tell me, don't do it this way because, like, sure. Yeah, and then, I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if some generation actually listened and took it to heart, and who knows how far along we could be. I don't know, right? Next. Okay. All right. Yeah, so people, we can skip this word. So, people were losing their farms. A lot of people just drove away. They didn't even bother to go through any paperwork or anything. They just left because there was just nothing for them, right? So go ahead and we'll just go through 3 shots of, the migration from the Great Plains out mostly out west to California, of course. 3.5 million people moved. It was, I think, the largest internal migration of people in the United States history. Next. Lots of famous photos from that time period. Next. Yeah. There's the electricity was an interesting thing that you don't hear a lot about, but these storms would produce a lot of static electricity. The dust would get ionized, and then there'd be so much static electricity that it would short the cars out. Your car would just stop because it's shorted out on the road. Yeah. So then you're stranded in that. So it's rough stuff. Next. Luckily, on I forget which year that was. It was 34 or 5. Luckily, one of the dusters was so bad that it got all the way to the East Coast, and coincidentally, and thank goodness, the dust blew into the open windows of a meeting in D.C. they were having about whether or not they needed to do something about this situation that was going on the Great Plains. And dust blew in, and so it was just like, wow, that's somebody saying something, right? Yeah. Next. So Roosevelt came out, and to see for himself. Next. Yeah. Then he started hiring professionals for the soil stuff. So Hugh Hammond Bennett, I think he's now what's considered the father of soil conservation. So he actually was a professional and had good ideas. So next. All right. Yeah, there you go. He's the father of soil conservation. Next. All right. So I love this quote of his. Of all the countries in the world, we Americans have been the greatest destroyers of land of any race of people, barbaric or civilized. What is happening is sinister, a symptom of our stupendous ignorance. But, it's like that would mean more if we didn't see that same sort of quote about other situations decade after decade. Yeah, it'd be nice. Like I say, it'd be nice if we'd learn something from history for once, right? Next. So then they got the Soil Conservation Service going. The CCCT was out there doing a lot of tree planting. They were doing a lot of tree planting out in the Great Plains for windbreaks. Next. All right. So basically, there were a lot of things that went into causing the Dust Bowl: the prolonged drought, the increased farming on marginal land, right? Poor land management, super poor land management, unrestricted and unmanaged use of farmland, all right, preceding the drought, higher demand for the crops that these farmers produced for a time, and then the advent of industrialized farming. All of those things had a portion of the blame for what happened. All right, next. So since then, if you fly over the Panhandle, all right, this is still what you're going to see, right? So when I went to college in Colorado, so I drove up through the Panhandle several times per year, back and forth, going to college, and I remember when I was that would have been in the 80s, they were still watering with the big aerial sprinklers on these fields. So they were big aerial sprinklers, and by the time I got there, all right, back when the speed limit was 55, remember that? Right? By the time I got there from Dallas, it was like 3 p.m, and they were watering in August at 3 p.m. with aerial sprinklers, right? Because they had tapped into the Ogallala Aquifer back in the 50s, and they had still not realized, this is another one of those historical things, to them it was endless. The water supply was forever. So they would water with aerial sprinklers at 3 p.m. when it was 100 and something degrees every day, day after day, you know, right? So since then, of course, since the 80s, they began figuring out, like, the shallow wells are going dry in the Ogallala Aquifer, right? But hopefully this time around, maybe we'll make some better decisions sooner than the last time. Next. That's for the science part. It's just erosion rates on croplands during the 80s. So there's still concern. It's one of those things where if you wait long enough, people forget and start getting into bad practices again. So you really have to keep up with what's going on. Next. All right. So they began to change from the big aerial sprinklers on top to this kind that hang down and spray straight down, right? So that was an intermediate, and then now a lot of the more modern ones, they'll bring it all the way to the ground, and it's, they'll have water, drip watering, right close to the ground, instead of having it be exposed, for evaporation. All right, next. Let's see. So this is a part, from where the levels of windblown dust have doubled over the 20 years prior to 2020. So again, you can't allow people to forget the historical aspect of the situation, because then you just go right back into the same thing. Next. All right. 16 million acres destroyed in Texas by erosion, right? So that's terrace to protect your farm. So we have on my land out there, the old terraces are still there from one of my great-grandfather put them into the land. And when I was a kid, I didn't really know why. When you go from the house down to where the tributary was, or to the creek, there's this one. Actually, there are like 2-3 areas where there was you'd go down, but then you'd kind of go over this bump, and then keep going, and there'd be another bump, right? But he sculpted that into the land, because that's what the terracing thing, to keep, water from going downhill too fast and eroding what was there, that kind of thing, right? So practices were learned, but again, you just got to ask how many times do we have to learn the same lessons? That's the question, right? So fingers crossed this time, right? All right, but that's the end of that. What happens mostly after the Dust Bowl? That's a whole nother lecture, right? It's a whole nother thing. So I hope that was interesting. And do you have any questions about any of it? Yes, ma'am.
How do they replenish the soil?
You got to wait. Yeah, you got to wait. You got to let nature do it. I mean, take it back. So large scale, you just got to wait. I mean, nature will do it. Small scale, there are things you can do on individual farms. You can bring in the organic material, old hay or whatever, and till it in. So there are things you can do to help what's there, but the actual topsoil buildup is more of a long-term natural process. So it really depends on the individual owners as to whether or not they're trying to help that process along. Does that make sense? And depending on where you are and what the rainfall is, the rainfall average, you can go like an inch of topsoil in the panhandle, naturally occurring, probably takes about 200 years to form. Just inch by inch, a couple hundred years for that area. Farther north you go, the longer that time period gets, right? Yeah. So yeah, there's still places. Places you can go in the high plains where there's nothing there. There's nothing growing. Because nobody happens to own that land, and nobody owns the land that wants to put in the material effort to rebuild the soil, because you have to bring in a lot of organic material, and you're going to have to irrigate. You're going to have the wells. It's a lot of work to do what nature had done for us. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Check back in 20,000 years.
Yeah, that's right. Wouldn't that be something, right? Any other questions? Are you all good? That's more than you wanted to know, probably. I don't know. Yeah. Go ahead.
Speaking of aquifers,
Yeah.
what is your opinion and lessons learned?
Uh-huh.
What is your opinion on the huge Bitcoin and Super for AI going in places like the Panhandle?
Yeah.
And they require a lot of water.
Yeah. I think it's, I mean, that's just a personal opinion. I think it's a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake.
We're going to pay for that.
Yep.
With
Yep.
the population growth in Texas,
Uh-huh.
all the concrete that's been poured,
Uh-huh.
how long will it be before we have flooding on all the lower land?
Yeah. It's a good, no, it's true. It's true that, I mean, in cities and so forth with all the impermeable surfaces and so forth, yeah, it's a mess. It's a mess. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Speaking of that, 40 years ago or about,
Uh-huh.
the Trinity River over here between Ennis and Kaufman flooded way out of its bank.
Uh-huh.
And my dad says, well, they did all that development up there in Dallas, laid all that concrete. Where it comes from?
Right, yeah, channelizing, the concrete. There's a whole lot of things that happen that are just going to make those sorts of flooding events worse, for sure. Just on a side note, speaking of concrete, some of the folks back in the 30s, back east in the north, they were trying to think of ways to help the Dust Bowl situation, and so they were like, how about we just pave it with concrete and we'll just have it where there are holes for the plants. I mean, so there'll be holes for the wheat, but then the concrete will keep the soil from blowing away. But that was actually an idea floated by somebody back east, and another person thought, was like, why don't we take chicken wire and cover it all, and that'll help keep this. It's like it's the Great Plains. It's like there's not enough chicken wire in the world, So yeah, you never know what kind of stuff people are going to come up with, but. Anyway, but it's a good thing that, folks, in historical societies, my Master Naturalist groups and so forth, the groups that are constantly trying to remind themselves of, what has happened in the past, what's been good, what's been not so good. I mean, we had to keep all that knowledge alive. We had to keep it going and instill it in the populace, in the community, constantly, all the time, forever, if we want to stand a chance, of not making the same mistakes over again. But it's hard. I know. Yep.
So related to your topic, in one of your opening slides, you talked about the pre-Columbian and so forth, and up to 1491. There's a book called 1491.
Yeah. Yep.
And it goes in. It's not one of those easy reads, so don't.
Yep.
Get too
I read it. No. Yeah. I'm familiar with it.
You know what it is.
Yep.
But it talks about how so many of the cultures or populations throughout the Americas, how they handled the land.
Yep.
Some were more successful than others.
Mm-hmm.
Some forms of government were more successful than others in terms of governing how their communities managed all that.
Yep.
They were here for thousands of years before any Europeans showed up.
Right.
And they went through those trials and tribulations, but they also, aggressively worked the land.
Yeah.
It wasn't just
Yeah.
a Garden of Eden with a few
Yep.
natives running around.
Yeah. They used fire aggressively. I mean, definitely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it wasn't for a long time. I know when I was a kid, we were taught that it was that they lived just with nature, and then that was just period, and then next chapter, and that's all we. But then, we've learned over time. There was like, no, they did a lot of work. I mean, to modify the land that would make it easier for them to hunt and grow and so forth. For sure. Yeah. Interesting stuff. All right. Yes, ma'am.
People interested in the no-till method of farming or gardening, and how do you do that? I mean,
Yeah.
my garden, I can spade it up, but there's a lot of hard pan here that I don't know how you could grow anything if you didn't.
Yeah. I know what you mean. And so the answer is yes. There's definitely. My son got out of UC Davis with a plant sciences degree last year, like 2 years ago now. Anyway, and so I just sort of do whatever he tells me now. It's like I can work a shovel and I can drive the tractor, and then he tells me what to do. But he's doing all kinds of stuff that I'd read about, like the no-till and so forth. And it's been a real education because, to do it, it's not easy. It's certainly a lot easier just to run the plow over the land. But what people who aren't in farming at all don't know is that, to grow a crop, with conventional methods, it's not just, 2 or 3 times over the field with a tractor. It's multiple times over the field with a tractor for one crop. The first tilling, the shaping, the planting, the fertilize, the pesticide, the harvest, the tilling back in. There's multiple times the tractor has to go over the land for one crop. So the no-till is trying to make it where the number of times gets reduced significantly, and keeps the compaction down, and keeps the amount of soil, of breaking up the soil to a minimum. But it takes work. So it's frustrating a little bit for me too, because like in the garden, things will start coming up and I want to pull them. I want to pull the weeds, and he's like, no, don't, cut them off. Yep. Yep. So I'm trying to learn, because it's hard, when you grow up pulling weeds and there's a weed, you want to pull that weed, and he's like, stop. You cut it off, and if you keep cutting it off, then the roots get exhausted and it won't come back. But you got to cut it off several times. I know, I'm shaking your head. I know. I'm wait till he looks the other way, and I'm like, pull the weed. But I know he's right. But it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, that no-till thing. But it is. It does save the soil. It does save the soil. Yeah. It's wild stuff. Yeah.
We have that saying, think globally, act locally.
Right.
And, when you want to know what you can do locally, number one, if you do have to mow your yard,
Mm-hmm.
mow it at 5 inches, not 2.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plant, native plants or
Mm-hmm.
whatever,
Mm-hmm.
Low water or drought resistant and all that kind of stuff, heat resistant or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and then let them grow.
Yeah.
Now, if you're in a homeowner association, you're probably going to get fined.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's rough sometimes. Yeah.
Convince your homeowner association that you're really conservative and
Mm-hmm.
doing good things for the ecology.
Yeah,
Anyway.
it's an education aspect that is so important, but it's hard. It's hard to educate, and it's definitely hard to educate some people that get set in their ways and don't want to learn anything new or don't believe you. You know what I mean? Yeah.
The Native Americans had a saying, we don't inherit the land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children.
That's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep, that's for sure. Yeah, and things like just simple stuff like, when I was a kid, you mowed and bagged everything up and you put it on a curb, and then now, we realize it's like, well, you're just removing all that carbon and the nutrients that need to go back into the soil. So you get the mulching blades on a mower and just mow it, and it all just goes right back into the soil, which is nice. But then another aspect that I had to deal with was, I always had to rake the leaves, right? And bag the leaves up and put them on a curb, right? And now it's like you learn, it's like, oh, well, and this is nice because it gives me a chance to reach my goal of being lazy, because it's like, that's really a goal and I hardly ever get to do it, you know what I mean? But it's like, you got to leave the leaf, like fall comes and leaves go down, I just leave them on the yard until spring. And then I run over it with a mulching blade or whatever and put that in. But it helps protect, the roots of the grass and so forth that are under the leaves, protects them from any hard winters that we might have. It also provides home for a lot of the beneficial larvae of different insects and so forth that become, bird food, if you like birds to be around, to have food for the birds. There's a whole lot of ecological pluses to just leave the leaves on the ground. But then you got to deal with neighbors that might not want that to be the case. And, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, Yeah. But we try. We just keep trying, you know. Well, thanks so much. Yeah, I hope that was interesting. Yeah.